Assassination attempts on Trump and Fico. What are the intelligence agencies missing? The Impact documentary reveals the methods and motives behind modern-day terror acts. The problem of terrorist attacks is escalating at an alarming rate worldwide. Are these attacks spontaneous events or meticulously planned acts? Do the shooters act on their own accord, or are they random victims influenced by prolonged informational exposure affecting their consciousness? Were the shooters who targeted both Fico and Trump criminals or victims? Were their actions motivated by personal beliefs and intentions to commit such acts of terrorism, as these incidents are undeniably acts of terror? Or were they skillfully manipulated by someone else, stealthily, deceitfully, and remotely? Many people might wonder, how can someone control another person? It's surprisingly easy, as evidenced by school shootings. The documentary The Impact, particularly the section School Shooting, goes into detail about the step-by-step method of puzzle piece coding of potential shooters who are unaware of their fate, and those orchestrating these events worldwide, who have a vested interest in such informational and physical acts of terrorism. The documentary The Impact provides clear insights into how such terrorist attacks are prepared and executed. The film explains why school shooters are as much victims as those they target, detailing the invisible influence exerted on children and adults through the information sphere and the motives behind it. It explores how mass programming identifies potential victims for terrorist acts, who the real targets of these attacks are, and who the ultimate orchestrators and beneficiaries are. When closely examining modern-day terrorist attacks, from school shootings to political terrorism, one can identify similar patterns. The recent attempted attack on former U.S. President Donald Trump raises many questions. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, who faced a similar assassination attempt 2 months ago, commented on Trump's incident on his Facebook page, "The scenario like a carbon copy. If the attacker on Trump knew Slovak language, all he'd need to do is read publications like Denik N, SME, or Actuality to feel the urge to deal with the disobedient former U.S. president. The scenario is like a carbon copy. Trump's political opponents try to silence him, and when they fail, they rile up the public so much that some unfortunate soul picks up a gun. And now, we'll witness speeches about the need for reconciliation, pacification, and forgiveness." The scenario seems like a copy-paste script. However, it wasn't written by Trump's political opponents, but by representatives of a hidden force aiming to destroy America and the entire democratic world. This hidden force emerged on the political scene in 1993, as revealed in an investigation by Egon Cholakian, a U.S. national security expert and intelligence instructor. Dr. Egon Cholakian presented a 30-year investigation into an anti-democratic force that has been operating in secrecy since 1993. The investigation is available on the international platform of Earth Save Science Collaborative, ESSC project. This breeding ground of global anti-cultism, discussed both in the investigation and the documentary The Impact, utilizes its network of anti-cult agents, including educators, lecturers, opinion leaders, corrupt journalists, media representatives, and members of political and law enforcement structures, to shape and manipulate public opinion to their advantage. They encode potential shooters from the desired regions to carry out their planned informational and physical terrorist attacks. Let's examine the details. The attempt on Donald Trump's life reveals a similar pattern of action as seen in the assassination attempt on Robert Fico. 1. Long before the incidents involving Trump and Fico, a massive media campaign was observed, including false criticism directed at them by certain media outlets. These outlets planted specific messages in their text to incite societal division, hostility, and hatred. 2. Both Trump and Fico were shot by random individuals from the crowd who were evidently subjected to informational programming in their regions well before the incidents. 3. In both cases, intelligence agencies had no prior information about the impending threat. 4. At the time of the attacks, both shooters harbored intense hatred toward these politicians and strongly disagreed with government policies. 5. In both instances, some media outlets actively promoted the narrative that the attackers were lone wolves acting independently. However, shortly after the crimes, the shooters' social media profiles either swiftly vanished or had conversations deleted, obscuring any records of their messages, friends, supporters, viewing habits, and interests. The documentary The Impact sheds light on who benefits from erasing the informational trail. These messages contained embedded codes designed to turn individuals into shooters. By examining this information, it is possible to identify those behind these events who are engaged in manipulative preparation in the region. 6. In both instances, the suspects were not mentally ill. They maintained intellectual activity. Notably, some media outlets attempted to portray the perpetrators in a heroic light, presenting information and photos of them in the most appealing manner. The glorification of criminals is one of the methods used in the puzzle piece coding of future shooters. 7. In both cases, information about these informational attacks in the USA and Slovakia was simultaneously published in global media, aiming to provoke bipolar disorders, a wave of outrage, a loss of a sense of security, hatred, and bewilderment among the masses about how such events could occur. Witnesses of these incidents, as well as those who encountered this information, experienced a state of shock. 8. Both cases sparked a wave of dissatisfaction with the authorities among the public. As an example, let's examine in detail the stages of the preparation for the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. 1. Informational terrorism against Donald Trump. The Trump cult. This act of terrorism unveils a much larger picture, a series of crimes that have already been committed, and those planned by the so-called shadow force, as detailed in the documentary The Impact. Influencers affiliated with this force manipulate the public consciousness through articles, news segments, and films, embedding specific informational inserts that are activated at opportune moments. For instance, through the tactic of creating a deliberately false negative image using labels such as cult, a negative image for Western countries, or sect, a negative image for Eastern countries, on any undesirable organization or individual. They massively shape negative public opinion. This manipulation incites hatred, discord, and hostility towards the targeted organization or individual, stigmatized by anti-cultists. The outcome achieved by this shadow force, specifically its anti-cultist branch, with Trump was not the result of a single day. They had been preparing for this event long beforehand. As far back as 2019, one of the ideologues of anti-cultism, Stephen Hassan, a so-called mind control expert and licensed mental health professional, drew parallels between Trump and figures such as Jim Jones, David Koresh, L. Ron Hubbard, and Sun Myung Moon in his book The Cult of Trump, asserting that this presidency bore significant resemblances to a destructive cult. A quote from the documentary The Impact. Hassan published a book titled The Cult of Trump, where he claims that every American who supports Donald Trump is a cult member, meaning they are not free in their opinions, not independent individuals, but rather people who need to be subjected to intervention, as Hassan puts it, or in other words, they should be forced to change their beliefs. Through controlled media, anti-cultists cemented the negative image of the Trump cult in people's minds and sought to lead readers to the idea that supposedly cults demand unwavering loyalty to the alleged leader and create a false belief that morality is defined and dictated by the cult leader. One of the clear signs of a cult is the members' unwillingness to even consider criticism of their leader. Group involvement helps explain why so many willfully ignorant Americans choose to ignore the truth and follow their cult leader. 2. Personality measures suggest Donald Trump exerts a cult of personality over his followers, people who are psychologically susceptible to his appeal. This could help explain how he has succeeded in U.S. politics while other populists have not. 3. Thus, deliberately false public opinion was shaped in society, inciting hatred among people and provoking violence and murder against those mentioned in the articles. Pay attention to contemporary articles and their nature, how they are going to glorify the assassin, destabilize society, foster distrust in the authorities, and incite hatred towards the government, along with developing rhetoric about civil war. All these goals and methods of anti-cultists are illustrated in the documentary The Impact. 2. The assassination attempt on Donald Trump. On July 13, 2024, an assassination attempt on Donald Trump took place, during which he sustained a gunshot wound to his ear, but survived by sheer luck. The shooter was positioned on the roof of an industrial building approximately 140 meters from the stage. He fired several shots toward the stage. One spectator was killed, and 2 others were injured in the incident. The suspect, 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks, was neutralized at the scene. A semi-automatic AR-15 rifle was found beside his body. According to the Associated Press, the weapon had been purchased by his father at least 6 months ago. CNN reports that explosive devices were discovered in the shooter's car, which was parked near the rally site, and explosive materials were found in his home. FBI sources describe them as rudimentary. What is known about Thomas Matthew Crooks? Thomas Matthew Crooks, 20, lived in the Bethel Park area of Pennsylvania near Pittsburgh. He graduated high school in 2022 and received a $500 award from the National Math and Science Initiative for Gifted Youth that same year. The young man worked at a rehabilitation center. According to Media Reports 5, Crooks was wearing a t-shirt featuring the YouTube channel Demolition Ranch on the day of the incident. This channel is known for its content on various weapons and explosive devices and boasts millions of subscribers. Media descriptions of the shooter, based on accounts from those who knew him, paint a picture of a quiet loner who occasionally wore hunting outfits to school. He was always getting good grades on tests and was very passionate about history. People described him as someone who seemed to know everything about the government and history. He was a nice kid who never talked poorly of anyone, and I never have thought him capable of anything I've seen him do in the last few days. The motives of the suspect remain unclear. Media reports suggest that he acted alone and posed no known threats to public safety. Additionally, Crooks had no history of mental illness. A quote from the film, The Impact. Thus, the target group gradually narrows down through the final stage of the coding process. The first wave of information coding affects thousands. Then from these thousands, only hundreds remain. And ultimately, only a few individuals are caught in the crossfire of all the necessary coding waves. It then becomes a matter of time to see who among them activates first, and who ultimately becomes the perpetrator of the implanted program. This is why shooters often appear entirely different from one another, with diametrically opposed personality traits, frequently without significant psychological issues, and most importantly, without apparent motives for committing such crimes. The suspect's social media page has been deleted. The platform Discord stated that it removed an account seemingly linked to Crooks. A quote from the film, The Impact. Another filter is the specific method of selecting themes through which the program components for executing a school shooting are embedded. These themes are chosen from the areas of interest to teenagers, which are typically opposite in nature. What does this mean and why is it done? A person is more likely to be interested in related topics. For example, someone interested in astronautics might also be interested in parachuting. However, to minimize the number of people caught in the cross-section of the informational coding waves, topics are chosen that rarely fall within the sphere of interest of the same person all at once. A young woman who attended political history courses with Crooks, 7 mentioned that their last topic was the assassination of the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. Considering the methods of puzzle piece coding, it can be inferred that this topic might have served as an informational and motivational component for Crooks, potentially acting as a trigger for his actions. A quote from the film, The Impact. Let me give you an example of an inducing wave of information coding that activates a teenager's program to commit a school shooting. The start command doesn't necessarily come through the media or the internet. It could be delivered by a guest lecturer at the school who incidentally mentions a person in their talk who dedicated their entire life to science but never gained worldwide recognition or fame. In contrast, the lecturer then cites Nobel laureates as examples, few in number, but they were able to achieve success. What embed does the potential shooter receive here? Their subconscious gets the directive that neither science nor diligent effort brings fame, and that life's meaning isn't in discoveries or hard work but in popularity. For if no one knows you, you're wasting your life. Therefore, there's no point to your existence. Thus, through a targeted form of infocoding, the activation of a pre-embedded program in a teenager's subconscious occurs unnoticed by those around them, leading to mass shootings. Out of thousands of teenagers caught in the crosswaves of infocoding, only a few become future shooters, and only in schools where the final stage of subconscious programming, the activation phase, has been conducted. This explains why, seemingly out of nowhere, children develop an attraction to weapons and a desire to harm others. It's simply an image that bypasses the critical perception of the conscious mind, penetrates the depths of the subconscious, and activates. Consequently, a teenager who recently had plans for the future, dreamed of romantic relationships, and was choosing a university or college suddenly becomes obsessed with planning a genuine terrorist attack with the fervor of a psychopath. This is how, in an absolutely cynical and cold-blooded manner, anti-cultists skillfully manipulate the malleable minds of future perpetrators of their malevolent will. They turn your children into terrorists and mass murderers. A quote from the film The Impact. The dissemination of glorified images of criminals as bait for those who also crave popularity acts as a filter, screening out those unsuitable for the role of perpetrator and infecting those with the active trigger that sets off the program's unpacking. By sheer luck and the shooter's lack of skill, Trump survived. However, some media outlets, particularly from countries unfriendly to the U.S., are speculating on what might have happened if the outcome had been different, thereby planting a new negative image in the public consciousness. The attack occurred just before Trump was scheduled to arrive in Milwaukee for the Republican convention, where he was to be announced as the presidential candidate. Despite his injuries, Trump made it to the convention. 3. Public reaction. Distrust in authorities. The public reaction to the event has been one of shock and distrust toward the authorities. According to the film The Impact, the intended outcomes of the hidden forces' influence on global society include shock, confusion, distrust in authorities, and a loss of a sense of security. For instance, Jason McKee, a 27-year-old local resident who lives near Crook's home and worked at his school when Crooks was a student, expressed his disbelief. "It's just shocking. You wouldn't think that something of this magnitude could happen right in your backyard," he said. "It's just a crazy situation." Everyone involved in high-level political and social processes understands that their lives could be at risk. After watching the documentary, The Impact, it becomes clear who among the peaceful citizens is being manipulated into becoming shooters, who is behind this manipulation, and what this hidden force on the global stage is. This hidden force not only incites senseless killings, but also engages in geopolitical blackmail and political manipulation. It is time for all rational members of society to grasp the essence and depth of the terrorism problem and resolve this issue once and for all by eradicating the harmful phenomenon of global anti-cultism. If global anti-cultism, like cancer on humanity's body, were to disappear today, it would prevent many crimes, save countless lives, and free society from both informational and physical terror.